Hi everybody, I'm Leah of seejanedrill. Now if this is your first time here, I want to welcome you and I want to encourage you to hang around, especially if you're a beginner in DIY home improvement and you want to sharpen those skills a little bit. Maybe you just bought a house. In today's video, I want to share some tricks and tips with you I think you should know. Now whether I'm working inside my shop or I'm outside in the elements, writing the rain all-weather notebooks, keep my notes in good shape. Write in the rain notebooks, repel rain, sweat, and grime. Okay, so tip number one is preventing something called spontaneous combustion. And believe it or not, it's when dirty, oily rags just ignite, okay? So one of the things I do after I get finished working, like if I'm staining something because there's a lot of oil in stain, I make certain that I get rid of the rag in the proper way. What I have here is I have a metal can. Let me take the lid off of it, okay? And one of the ways you can control spontaneous combustion happening in a shop is you take your oily rags when you get finished with them, you put it in a metal can that has a little bit of water in it, and you make certain that you put on the lid. And the reason for that is it takes the right conditions for spontaneous combustion to take place. And one of those things, one of those factors is oxygen. So when you put the lid on, you're cutting off the flow of oxygen, and it's less likely that you're going to have to worry about spontaneous combustion happening in your shop. Now our next tip has to do with three things: plumb, level, and square. And I got to tell you, all three things are related, but they're not the same. Now what is plumb? Plumb is determining whether or not something is perfectly straight, vertically, up and down. And the way you determine whether or not something is plumb straight is you use a level or a plumb bob. We're going to use a level here. Now I want you to notice this top vial right here, okay? That determines whether or not something is plumb. Remember, straight up and down. You want that bubble right in the center. So if it's skewed a little bit that way or this way, then you're going to know it's not plumb. Now the next thing is whether or not something is level, and that's horizontal. Horizontal is level. And the way you determine whether or not something is level is with a level. This bubble right in the center of the vial, well, that lets us know if the surface that we have our level on is level. So if it's a little off, well, then that bubble's not going to be in the center. Now next, let's talk about square. This is a speed square, but I got to tell you that there are other things that you can use to determine square. This right here is a combination square. I'll show you how to use this as well. And believe it or not, there is a theorem called the Pythagorean theorem. Is a way that you can, well, you could square up a football field using that formula. Now, what is square is a perfect 90-degree angle. That's what we've got here. It's perfect, okay? So you take your speed square and you put it right there in that corner, and you're looking for a nice tight fit, the side and at the bottom, and that's what tells you that this is square. Now if it was slightly off like that, well then you would know, well wait, we've got a gap here, that's not square. Now let me show you how a combination square works. That's what this is. And a lot of people like combination squares because they'll use it in their wood shop when they're building furniture or projects indoors. And the way you check for squares, just like this, you rest that square right there, and you're looking for a nice tight fit up across the top and down the sides. Now our next tip has to do with saws, and it's very simplistic, but I got to tell you, if it isn't something that someone's told you, you wouldn't know. So here it is. When you're sawing wood, no matter what saw you're using, you want to point your finger. because that's going to give you a nice straight cut. Now, I'm not going to use this dovetail saw on this piece of plywood because, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to use this Harbor Freight saw. And again, it's still the same. You point that finger and it will keep you going straight. If you don't point your finger and you just grab hold of the saw like this and try to cut a straight line, I can tell you that saw is going to wander right off that line. You're not going to get a straight cut. So remember, whenever you're using a handsaw, you want to point that finger because that's going to keep you on track. Okay. See how pointing that finger kept me right on track. Now our next tip has to do with two-fers. Now what is a two-fer? Well, it's a tool that has additional uses that just may not be obvious. Now I'm going to show you a few tools that have tools built into them. So if you're just starting off in woodworking, you'll want to remember that a handsaw is also a 90-degree straight edge and also a 45. It's got it built right into the handle. So if you need to square off a piece of lumber and you want it to be 90, you just strike that line like that. If you want it to be 45, you take your handle and you rest it. So it's resting at a 45-degree angle and you strike that line. It's just that simple. Now our next tool that's a two-fer is a chalk box. That's what this is here. And when you want to strike a chalk line, well, you use one of these, right? Well, here's the thing that a lot of folks don't realize. A chalk box is also a plumb bob. Can you see where it says plumb bob? And it's the tool inside the tool that people tend to forget about. You know, we were talking about plumb, level, and square. Well, you can use this tool instead of a level to determine whether or not something is plumb. So a plumb bob is always attached to a piece of string, and that thing will swing back and forth until it finally settles down and it determines plumb. That's, of course, is vertical, okay, with the help of gravity. So our last two-fer is this tool right here. It's a wood clamp. And, you know, here's the thing. When you get started in woodworking, well, you realize really quickly that, well, woodworking tools are pretty pricey. So if you don't have a wood vise or a bench vise, let me tell you, you can use a wood clamp. Let me show you what I mean by that. So there we go. I've got my wood secured in my wood clamp, see? This is how we do it. And then I take this, I put it on my table, I take a C-clamp, and I secure it to the table I'm working on. So that's an effective way to turn a wood clamp into a wood vise. Now what I want to say is, if you're not a beginner and you're seasoned or you've got a few tricks or tips you want to share with the community, hey, take an opportunity and share those tips and those tricks in the comments below. This is Leah. As always, you can do this. See you next time.